We're now going to look at the 7 major steps of story structure. This is what every typical plot follows. These are all Truby's ideas. They have all kinds of details of what makes a story ideal. And there's actually 15 more, so it's 7 plus 15. As I read them, keep in mind we've only gone about through 10, maybe 15% of the book. So he goes into quite a lot more detail. I'm obviously not going to cover every single one of them in as much information. That's why you should get the book yourself, read about it, see what you like, see what you don't like, and learn how to make or compose stories. As well as when you read a new book or you watch a movie or play a new game, keep these things in mind. See if they're hitting them on a dramatic or a personal level to you, to see whether or not these kinds of stories impact you. It also tells you what you should and shouldn't like. So, the first one we've talked about before is called weakness and need. This is a profound flaw in the protagonist. This is like serious inside. This is something the hero must fulfill in order to have a better life. Now, the better life could be internally for himself, so a psychological need, or it could be externally, so it's a moral need, how they deal with others, how they deal with society. This is the whole point of their development, to discover what this is. So without having, or a character without having a weakness or deficiency, there's no way for this character to go somewhere, psychologically or morally. They're just going to just be the same character. And it's very hard to identify with someone if they don't have something that brings them down to everyone else. They're not Superman. They don't have a complete understanding of the universe. They're going to fall. They're going to screw up. They're going to do something wrong. So you need to have a psychological and a moral need. One is internal. It's below the surface. That's kind of hard to show. And a psychological one, which hurts them and only them. So the moral one is hurting others. And one thing I sort of disagree with on Truby is that he doesn't think the protagonist should ever be a victim. He also doesn't believe they should never be perfect, like a Mary Sue. That I agree with. But a victim, it's kind of hard to describe simply how he relates to that. He goes into more detail later, which I do agree with, but there's nothing wrong with making any sort of character have a flaw. And it's a result of something or result of someone being a victim. That's fine. I think what he means is playing the victim out through the story. Like, you don't want him to become the victim and then he's constantly doing things like that a victim would do, and you're sort of like, okay, this person is pathetic and can't go anywhere. I think that's what he's getting at. You sort of need these 2 basic things in a character, in a protagonist, for drama to work, for drama to happen in the average person. And it's going to be different for everyone. The story has to address this, usually right before the climax or right before the plot is resolved, but definitely more so than the plot, because the plot is the surface. The plot everyone should see. Everyone is like, yeah, I know what's going on, save the day, get the girl, blah, blah, blah. Great. It's underneath these things that it's hard to figure out. So you have to know how to express when your character is down in the dumps or is going through some sort of internal conflict. You have to know something about your own problems, your friends' problems, your family's problems, and talk about that and relate that in interesting ways. It also should be tied into the plot, but that's sort of everything should be tied into the plot, obviously. Then there's desire, the motivation, the plot, the goal. This is the surface thing. This is what we all see. It is the driving force of the story, and this is the thing that gets the audience interested in your story. After the introduction, after the problem is introduced, in media res, fish out of water, however you do that, what's going on? Why is he doing it? So this is what I call the why of the story, or the goal of the story. We always have to tell the audience what's going on. Why is it going on? We don't have to explain everything. We just have to explain at least one thing on the surface so everyone can look at it and say, oh, yeah, I know what's going on. This is a guy who's running for his life, or he's hungry, or whatever. It's something obvious and simple. So this is connected to the need, but they have to be two separate things. Because all stories are about what the protagonist wants, or what he wants to do. The same way how the antagonist has the same interest. They should share the same things. So you don't need to tell everyone about everything about your character at first. They should express that through the need as you go, and it's how you do it is part of your designing principle. How you tell your story, what story beats are you hitting? How is your dialogue from your characters addressing the conflict properly? To say, hey, dude, you just did you just did an immoral action just to get to where you're going. That's very important. You have the supporting cast, or the writing on the wall has to be very clear, in a subtle way, of course. You can't just keep blaring it at people. It's not very. Don't be preachy. There's a balance between being preachy and having a plot, and you have to figure out what that balance is in your particular story, in your particular message, in your ideologies, and the moral argument you want to present to your audience. You could just do a good versus evil plot, or moral argument. That's the simplest one. But there's other ways, like black comedies and pathos and all those other ones. But it should work with the plot always. So the third one is the opponent. Again, I've said this before, the opponent is just like the protagonist, but on a slight different way of looking at the plot and how they get there. Generally, the opponent is the bad guy. He's already bad, but the way that Truby likes to see the opponent is someone who's changing with the story, or with the protagonist at times whenever they come into conflict. So they teach each other. They want the same thing. They have the same plot, and they're competing against each other. By doing so, both grow and both change. And you have to show some of that. Not all of it. There's a lot that's left to the imagination, but at least one clear going, aha, now I understand, now I can get better, now I'm weak, or whatever. And they strive and they get motivated to challenge each other. So the focus of here is something that's a very deep personal form of conflict. You have to ask yourself, what is the most important thing these two people are fighting about? What is it they do that hurts each other the most, or challenge each other the most than any other character? Because if they are not challenging each other the most, try to either change their need or get rid of one of the characters to get a better one. And I talked about this in this last video. A hero or a protagonist should never be fighting themselves. The need is something that they're either not aware of or they don't consider important until they get to the revelation, or right before the revelation, and they make the choice, and then they become a new character. So that's kind of important to keep in mind, to have this thing under the surface. Because if they're aware of it at the start of the story, they go, oh, I got to change my ways, and the story's done. I'll just go on my plot, and it's boring as hell. It's like, oh, he's the perfect dude for the job. Great, done. All right, the fourth one is the plan. So you have your plot, you have your need, you have your opponent. How are you going to get there? Where are you going? If you're going to Ottawa, well, you're going to drive, you're going to fly, what are you going to do? This is directly linked to the plot, of course, and it's for overcoming the opponent as well. So in some cases, some protagonists, some antagonists as well, are so good at coming with a plan and a counter plan, a contingency plan, a contingency, other contingency plan. It happens so quickly, these characters become unbelievable. So you either have to make them like this master at speed chess, and they can just figure things out on the fly, or you have to, give them some sort of ability, like, Batman has a plan for everything. Why? Because he actually stops and thinks, how am I gonna survive? How am I gonna win? And there's actually tropes based on Batman on his particular method. If you read the comics and how he does it, so that's important. So we have all these characters. We have the goal. We have the opponent. We have the plan, and now we have the actual battle. Think of this as an ongoing thing, but when Truby speaks of it, he's referring to the final confrontation usually. So this is pretty much all conflict between the protagonist and the antagonist, how you summarize it. It builds up as the story goes. That's how you do drama, little by little, bigger and bigger. Think of it as attack, counterattack, counterattack. This is also referred to as the crucible of the protagonist. He has to go through this gauntlet to become this new character. And the way that Truby puts it, I actually kind of like it, as a tennis match. And you don't want the opponent to be weaker than the antagonist, or else the protagonist, or else the guy's just going to constantly win. You also don't want the antagonist to be a god, because he's just going to steamroll. He's going to spin his web, and the protagonist is going to be totally lost. And you may as well be writing a pathos, or even a dark comedy would work because it's so pathetic. It's like, oh my god, the system is destroying this guy. There's nothing he can do, and he's dead. Whatever. The idea is for a tennis match is to have the antagonist is the pro player who does amazing shots, and then he has some genius shots every time. And then there's the upcoming rookie who's hot-headed and really he's the protagonist. He's like, oh, I'm gonna really win this dude, and he's got to really hit all his shots or he's gonna lose. I thought that was a good analogy. The sixth step is the self-revelation. This is what I say you write out of all your things you plan out. This is the third thing you write. Everything leads to this. This is where all the drama is. It's also referred to as character growth. The internal stuff is psychological needs, affects yourself. The external growth is the moral needs, affects others or the society you're in. Everything that was holding the protagonist back from achieving their goal or defeating the antagonist, it's gone. So he's figured out what he has to do. He's a new character. It doesn't matter if he beats him. It may not be that. Like in the original Rocky, it wasn't about beating this dude. It was just about going the distance. So whatever that is to the protagonist, as long as it's spelled out, that's what matters. So this need has to be brought about first, at like the first opening scene, really. This moral or psychological need, or both, right at the start. So when we get to where we have to go, which is again the third thing you write, you know exactly where you're going, and it starts at the first scene. So don't waste time creating all this worlds and gigantic settings. I mean, that's fine. You can do that as you go, but really identify with the main character as soon as possible and show that need. So self-revelation, you go through the battle, and the protagonist just he has a moment of satori, or he listens to one of his side characters, or the lava is like falling on his arms. He's like, oh, lava burns. I can't do this. He can back away, or he can keep going. This is good. Conflict is necessary for this. And what's a great idea from Truby, of course, is the antagonist, through his volleys with the protagonist, also has a revelation. And the interesting thing about that is his needs, because usually the antagonist has a very flawed moral argument, but it's justified. And as long as you're justifying themselves, that the logic of the story continues. If the antagonist is like, oh, I'm gonna eat all the babies in this small village because I'm awesome, no one's really gonna sit down and go, yeah, that's an awesome character. No, there has to be something about this guy who's doing bad things that makes sense, like killing people who wanted to die because of pain or things they can't do. He goes around, he's like Dr. Kevorkian, he just ends their life. Probably not with their consent or 100%. Probably didn't get it in writing, but he does it because he thinks he's the angel of death or whatever. Something like that. So again, requires the psychological moral change. You want the internal, the external, and resounding the theme, main theme, secondary themes, whatever you've got. The choice has to be made here, where the self-revelation comes about and the choice is made. And when you have this revelation, what the moral is or what the internal message is, you never tell the audience that. There are methods where you can do that, but it sort of defeats the purpose of what the story is if you just go out and say it. Like, did you not read the story? Did you not see the progression of this character? And if you have to spell it out to someone, it's... I always say clarity is best, but I mean, going through the steps of the story, you should know through all the tribulations the character goes through. If you can't figure out why he's the hero or what choices they've made, something is really messed up. Something is really screwed up in trying to be clear. You can be too subtle. You can be... I'd rather a story be too subtle than just blatantly obvious. Because if you're blatantly obvious the entire time, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, this is a story about Bob. Bob does this. Now he's having a self-revelation, and now he's going to help his partner be a better person. Okay, great. Can I go home now? There's no magic. There's no mystery. There's no, we're not here to read a template. We're here to read a story or experience a story, to be moved with everyone else. So you do this by showing the audience of the actions leading up to this revelation. They should be clear why this character is what he is. The seventh step is the new equilibrium. This is kind of like saying climax plus denouement in the dramatic sense. But think of it as the story, the plot line has been achieved, the goal has been done. The result of that person's actions as a new character, because they have been changed, positive, negative, or in some other way, they have changed themselves. And that's also for the protagonist, if it's an even more interesting character or more interesting story. And these changes could be good or bad, based on whatever revelation you gave them, or whatever story you wanted to give. I know it sounds like the plot is sort of like this thing, just to get these human personas to change. And that's kind of what I get reading Truby's stuff. And you get that a lot reading about things like thematic revelations, where he wants this almost a metaphysical vibe to go through the audience when they see this and they experience this. Like, oh, how does this relate to me? And that's what happens at the end. So he goes into so much more detail about character, talking about weaknesses and needs and conflicts and immoral actions and motivations and all sorts of things. So identifying with the character is good, but there's more to a story than just basic psychology and basic morals. And I recommend people reading Truby's book, because there's 15 more steps. I can go over them if you're really interested, but I recommend everyone pick up the book and see for yourself what you think whether Truby is really doing a great job, or he's actually making a new template out of an organic story that he's trying to impart. Because it's kind of funny for me to listen to, it's all organic, it's all natural, and I've never seen a thicker step-by-step process for writing a very, very regimented story or approach to storytelling, at least.